Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to be talking about some developments that have happened with the new Wolfman film that is currently being developed by Blumhouse Studios through Universal. And this is kind of the film has just picked up its director, and the director doesn't necessarily fill me with extreme amounts of confidence. But I'm going to kind of get to that because it's one of those things where I like a majority of the things that he's done, but something that he just did I did not like. But basically, to give you kind of a lowdown, after the failure of The Mummy, the big movie that starred Tom Cruise. The Universal decided to dump a lot of their monster properties to Blumhouse to make lower budgeted horror films. One of the first ones that came, I think actually the first one that came out from them was The Invisible Man, and it is credible to note that The Invisible Man did make money, mainly because its budget was about $7 million, which is minuscule in today's day and age. So even for a horror budget, that's pretty low when you have notable people in it. So because of the low budget, that movie made a large amount of money at the box office in the end. Now, going forward from that, we have the news that the director of The Invisible Man is going to be directing The Wolfman, which is also set to star Ryan Gosling. Now, I have several issues with Ryan Gosling in the part because I don't necessarily know if he can be believable in that makeup unless they do a thing where they do makeup prosthetics and then when the werewolf is actually out, it's a different person in the suit doing that. I don't think Gosling can pull off that type of intimidation. He can be intimidating in films, like in the movie Drive. He can be extremely intimidating, but he's intimidating in kind of that quiet guy who can fuck you up kind of way, as opposed to a snarling monster, which is really what the Wolfman is when he's in his transformed state. And the other thing is, I don't necessarily dislike Gosling as an actor either. I think he can probably pull the weight if he has to play the human part of the role. It's just my question is, can he pull the weight of the monster part of the role? So that's a little bit up in the air. But now we go into the actual director, which is today's news. And Leigh Whannell has been signed on, or Lee, I can't remember exactly how it's pronounced. But he has been signed on to do this film as a director, and again, he is coming off of The Invisible Man, which was a financial success. Now, Whannell in the past has done. He was very heavily involved in the early era of the Saw franchise. He actually acted in the first film. He was one of the guy. He was the white guy not the white guy, the younger guy who was locked in the bathroom with the other guy who was like the businessman. So he played a part in that movie. He also wrote it, and I believe he also executive produced it or co-produced it. But moving forward from that, then you have, I believe it's Insidious Chapter 3, he was also involved in, and he also wrote that. And like I said, he also wrote the he also wrote the screenplay for The Invisible Man. So I trust him in a sense that he's done work before that I guess I would find at least interesting. I do like the first Saw film. I think it's kind of I think it evolves into torture porn, but initially it had an actual story before it was just gore effect after gore effect. So I do kind of like the first Saw movie, and even the second one, actually. The second one is kind of interesting, too. But after a while, it just became, kind of like Final Destination. Like, it's just a Rube Goldberg machine of death. But now, since he's done that, he really hasn't done a whole lot in other genres. He stayed mostly in Saw and the Insidious franchises. So he's dabbled out a little bit with a couple different things, but for the most part, he's kind of stayed in that vein. And like I said, one of the other things that he's kind of known for right now is The Invisible Man, because he's just coming off of it. And The Invisible Man had problems. It had a lot of problems. It had problems from a writing perspective. It had problems from an effects perspective. It had problems from, I wouldn't say necessarily an acting perspective. I think the acting in the film is actually probably one of the more solid parts, but definitely there's some problems in the story structure and the writing, which he was directly involved in. So that concerns me a bit. And going ahead with, if you take that idea too, because I'm pretty sure the Wolfman probably won't have too big of a budget. I think you might max out at like 10 million. I'm not sure if it's listed right now, but I'm pretty sure the budget for that probably is not very big because Blumhouse wants to make a profit on the film. So they're probably going to try and do it similar to how they did The Invisible Man. Now, The Invisible Man, the real effects, like the stuff that you could see on screen, wasn't terrible. The problem is when you got into CGI, because there is CGI in that film. And the CGI looks like a crappy PS2 game. So that's where I'm concerned. If they're going to go the CGI route with the Wolfman, I don't want him to look like a weirdo. It doesn't make any sense why he would, why you would use CGI for that character, but it's possible that it could be. And the thing is, you don't want your monster to look goofy. Now, with the Invisible Man, it's a little bit different because it was kind of just a guy in a suit, even though it kind of looked kind of stupid. You don't see the monster in the Invisible Man. You just kind of view what's happening on screen, and obviously you can't see the actual person doing the acts, but you see the result of the acts. And there's also another part in that movie where he flips over a table, and they decided they wanted to use a CGI table in the scene to flip. I don't know why that decision was made. I don't know why you couldn't just use an actual table. But it's kind of stupid to do that because it looked very, very goofy. It looked very clunky. And then the other part, like I said, was the story elements. Now, the story elements in The Invisible Man, there was a lot of missing context. And I get the idea of like, okay, you got to let the audience kind of find their way through the film. But, the scenes just kind of jump and we don't really know what's happening. Now that's okay for the beginning of a film until we get to a point, but after that initial scene, we don't really get too much of an explanation as to what's happening with Elizabeth Moss's character. We know that she escaped from him somehow. We don't necessarily know. There's a woman that comes and picks her up, and we don't know that it's her sister until until a scene that takes place, weeks and weeks later. Even if you just put a line in there when she gets in the car, you say like "drive, sis" or something like that. That would have been enough. And then the other problem we have is the house that she's living in, which is owned by a cop. We don't know he's a cop until 20 minutes after we meet him. They never mention it, and then he mentions it in passing. And the easiest way to do it would be they actually do it in a scene a bit later on, which is kind of funny to me why you wouldn't just kind of switch those things around in terms of the script to try and get one first, or just kind of use the visuals. But there's a scene where he's dressed up in his uniform, or not his cop uniform, but he's a detective, so he's dressed up in a suit and tie and stuff like that. And then on his waist, we see the police badge. So we get confirmation that he is a cop. He mentions it kind of in passing in a scene before that where they try to make a weird, funny joke about a ladder that doesn't land very well. The humor in it also, what humor is in it is not very funny. It's very clunky. It doesn't work very well. So, moving from that, then you have that situation where now we have a character that we don't know. We know he's connected to the main character somehow. We don't know what he does. We don't know why she's there specifically. We don't know who knows this guy. If she knows, it doesn't appear that she knows him very well. But then we find out that the sister knows him, and then that's who set everything up, and yada yada, and whatever. And like I said, it does explain it, but it explains it at a point where we've already asked the questions, and we don't at the point where it explains it, we almost don't even care about the answer at that point. Because it's gone on for so long that we're just like, okay, she lives with this guy. All right, let's continue on with the story. It feels like there were things that may have been cut out of that film, or maybe cut out of that script that may have been needed. And that's not necessarily the director's fault. That could have been the studio or something like that said that, we want certain things cut out, or we want it shorter, or this or that. But I think that because they have a little bit more faith in him, I hope they're going to give him a bit more leeway when it comes to making the film. And then we also have the other problem of the fact that this is a reboot. It's a reboot of a very, very popular film. And actually, I shouldn't say reboot, it's a remake of a popular film that had already been remade by Joe Johnston with Benicio del Toro. And that movie was not overly great either. The CGI in it was not very good. It had a lot of gore effects, which I wasn't really expecting when I sat down and watched that film. But this is now your second go at this particular werewolf franchise. Again, werewolf films are kind of, I don't want to say generic, but there's really only two werewolf series that are kind of worth. I wouldn't say worth looking at because it depends a lot on your taste. But it's really the Wolfman, and the various older Universal films that involved him, and American Werewolf in London. And outside of that, I really don't see too many werewolf films that I would put on the upper echelon of horror. And that's not to say that there aren't good werewolf films. It's just that I wouldn't put them on as much of a pedestal as I do those two. Those two stand out above all else. So you're going to remake probably the best werewolf film that has ever been made, and probably one of the best portrayals of a werewolf victim with Lon Chaney Jr. That's the other thing too, is that Ryan Gosling, I think he can pull off the Lon Chaney stuff. I don't have really any problem with that. Like I said before, I think he's a decent actor. I have a problem with, I feel like the director is moving down a road at this point where these are low budget films. They know they're probably going to make a profit because of the name that's attached to them. And because of Blumhouse's previous success, because I know they're gonna plaster Blumhouse all over this film, and the opening credits are gonna have Blumhouse, all of that stuff. They're gonna have, all the people that were involved in it and stuff like that, and Blum himself and his wife, who both run the studio, are going to probably have their names plastered all over this thing. So that's going to be a draw for some people who are really diehard Blumhouse fans. But I don't know. This whole thing with the Universal, shifting over and trying to remake the monster movies, I don't like it. I hope that they don't try to hammer some ham-fisted, stupid plot into this, like the whole, abuse victim thing they do in The Invisible Man, which I think ultimately is not the right way to do that story. You don't combine The Invisible Man with Fatal Attraction. That's not really, well, kind of a reverse of Fatal Attraction because it's the guy hunting the girl in this scenario. But still with that idea. And also the other thing is the twists in The Invisible Man were pretty basic. The people that I was watching it with at the time actually called out most of the twists. So I can't say that they were particularly good. So I hope that this film is written better than that one, but at the same time, I don't really have a whole lot of faith that it's going to be good. But I want to know what you think. Put in the comments below. Are you excited for this reboot? Do you like Leigh Whannell, the director? Do you think that he can do a good job with this? Did you like The Invisible Man? Or are you like me and you think that they should probably just leave this stuff alone? The classics will never be equaled and they should not be remade. As usual, put your thoughts in the comments below. I like to read them. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?